Swati, welcome to the lockdown sessions. Finally, we get to sit down and actually have a conversation. How are
you? Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Now, you're joining us from Chicago?
I am, yes. And we have a surprisingly sunny day today, so.
Well, I grew up in the 70s, and in the early 80s, the Blues Brothers came out, which created an immediate love for the Chicago world and what life was like there. And in my head, when anyone says Chicago, I just envision the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, we either hear the Blues Brothers or Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Those are the two movies, right?
Actually, is equally, if not perhaps better.
We can have another whole session on that.
Just on Ferris Bueller, who's quite frankly, his twist and shout scene in the middle of downtown, with the Beatles screaming in the background, is an excellent cinematography filming event. Yeah, Swati, but we're not here to talk film. We're here to talk coaching, executive leadership development, the fact that you operate as a consultant as well from a strategic advisory perspective. And we're looking at exploring some coaching programs in 2021 to work together. So inviting you on to the lockdown sessions, one, because we're going to be out of lockdown soon and we'll run out of time. Two, yeah, right, a couple of months, hopefully here in the UK. Once the lockdown is over, no more lockdown sessions, that's for sure. But more importantly, to kind of get your views. You work in this space, the same space that I work in. Your observations around leadership, what you're seeing with people having to go through constant change. How are people coping with what's needed of them? So my starter for 10 with everybody is always the same. So let's go from there if we could. What's been some of your observations in the last 11 months or so? Like, what do you notice going on around you?
Yes, thank you. You know, one of the things I'm noticing is in some ways people get to the heart of the matter much more quickly than they did before. And I don't know if it's because we're at home, we're in the same space, and you do have some thinking time or maybe less distraction, like you can't get away from thinking deeply. Maybe that's better. Versus if you're rushing through an airport or we're meeting in a restaurant or a hotel lobby or something, you know, and all this other stuff is going around you. People are, I find in my coachings, very much ready to get to this is what's really going on for me internally. This is what's going on for me externally. And that really gives us a richer conversation.
That's quite lovely, really, isn't it? Because it means that more meaning is coming into our conversations. What is it, do you think, that's triggered this kind of radical candor from everybody?
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's more meaning, and it's lovely after we go through the journey. Stepping into it, I think it's a little bit scary for people too, because it is something that we've elegantly avoided, you know, before. And I think really what's happening is you are around your family and you, well, some of the things perhaps you used to do before to really offset your stress, right? We'll take a little weekend away. We'll go to the beach. We're going to go and eat at this lovely restaurant, take a vacation, you know, go to the spa, all these things I can't do. And I finally have to just say, you know what? I'm having a hard time with this. And here's how I'm showing up as a leader. And this is what it's doing to my brand. And here's how I'm showing up at home with my friends and family. It's kind of like all the avenues you had to kind of either just relax a little bit or I guess offset it or ignore it, they're gone. And so we're kind of only left with ourselves, right?
Yeah, because people don't have gyms at home and they don't have multiplex cinemas where they can go and watch a movie or have someone cook for them.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
You talk about leaders there. How do they need to be showing up? We've heard a lot about, inclusive leadership. We've heard a lot about collective leadership over this period. what do you feel are some of the kind of qualities leaders need to be exhibiting right now?
Yeah. And I think this is really pulling and stretching leaders in a whole different way, because this is something that we're all going through. So, sometimes one person is up and one person is down, and they can connect and kind of, collectively raise above. We're all going through the same thing. And so if you're a leader, you're personally experiencing things, but so is your team. And part of your role, of course, is supporting your team, inspiring them and motivating them when you may not be feeling those very feelings, right? And so I think it's a real delicate balance to say, what do I share with the team so that they know we're all in this together? But then how do I get us all to do that lift? And sometimes you have the energy for it, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you have to say, that was last week, and next week it's a whole new week, or it's a whole new day. And so I think, of course, we have the leadership responsibility of, I'm at the forefront of this team, but I think you have a responsibility to kind of have some grace with yourself and say, I'm going to let go of what I could or couldn't do last week and move forward.
I get the sense that everybody, not just leaders, by the way, are working harder during this working from home period. And I wonder how we offset that and what leaders can do, because, we can show up, we can be vulnerable, we're encouraged to be vulnerable and share. Not everybody's ready for that yet. Okay, if you're not going to maybe share, you need to encourage others to share. How do you do that? How do you create that kind of intimacy and safety for people to want to share how they're feeling? There's quite a lot riding on the fact that we're assuming we can all communicate with ease with how we feel and what that looks like and how we'd want it to change. I don't know. Can leaders help here?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that, by the way, is a skill that is helpful for us in the professional realm and in the personal realm. And I might start with that personal side first, where I'm talking to people about their long hours and how they're working all the time. And then they go upstairs or downstairs or wherever dinner is, and they're still sort of, in work mode. And we started talking about, oh, well, I used to have transition time when I commuted back home, right? I had that time to kind of, even if you were taking a train, a bus, driving, whatever you were doing. And so I started talking to leaders about, well, how can you create a little bit of space before you rejoin your family so you intentionally take the transition time? And the reason I share that is sharing challenges and stories like that, I think, opens up the conversation. So, for example, me saying that to my team, like, what I noticed, that I was still kind of in work and deliverable mode when I sat down to dinner. So it was like boom, boom, boom. What was your homework? What is for dinner? When is bedtime? Click, click, click. And the family kind of wants to relax and connect. And me sharing that, I think, would open up the conversation. Now, perhaps you're a leader who really does not like to reveal personal stories and information. And for that, we always talk about what is authentically you, because we're not trying to turn you into someone else, right? Where is the dial setting really authentic for you? Because that is more meaningful for the people you're interacting with. And that's something they can connect to. They can't connect to the person you're trying to be. They can
Right.
connect to you.
So it really is more and more so about the relationships that we're willing to build.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. What impact and results do you want? What are the impacts you're seeing today, and what results are you seeing today, and what action would that require? And then how do you do that action in a way that's authentic to you? If you're telling me that is the result that is number one and most important for you. And by the way, I do like to study, what are we doing instead? What are we doing instead of the things that we're saying we want? Because I think there's something to understanding, why do I behave the way that I do behave? There's a reason that I'm doing that. And sometimes it's coming from, a sense of trying to control something because things feel out of control, protecting something, trying to go along with something. Like, what is the root of that? Because if I can understand the root and kind of unlock that, that's where I have the space then to shift behavior. Otherwise, I'm kind of just tacking on tactics on top of tactics, and it's not sustainable.
Well, I think it's psychology room 101, isn't it? Behavior changes after motivation shifts. So if you want to, if you live with somebody, if you're listening to this and you live with somebody whose behavior has changed, I will almost guarantee that something has shifted in their motivation before the behavior. And I think that tapping into people's motivation, like what truly moves their heart to do something, is
Yes.
why you then get that kind of result.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So whether it's, I don't want to micromanage anymore, but I seem to go into meetings and I don't delegate, or I seem to try to lose the same 10 pounds over and over. Like, what am I doing and what are the things I'm doing and why am I doing them? Like, understanding those, it's really important for behavior change.
Yeah, I think it's looking for positive and negative deviance, right? Moments in the past where you can either replicate, or those moments which were sliding doors moments, so you don't sort of replicate that. Choose differently next time.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes. And sometimes we want quick results, but with changing ourselves, that's just not going to happen probably. It takes time.
You also work with groups, specific demographic groups. You work with women, people of color in the leadership space. Are there more demands there, and from a kind of, maybe from an inclusion, a diversity perspective, perhaps more, uh, are the rules changing now when it comes to leaders of color, for example?
Yes, absolutely. So, one is there's an increased awareness and willingness to have the conversations because I truly believe that people want to do the right thing. I am optimistic that way. I do believe that, and I think that people were afraid to talk about these topics. So, first of all, there's increased awareness and understanding and a desire for change. Secondly, I'm seeing that companies are more and more willing to invest in the specific needs of their segments. And third, I am seeing that companies are thinking more deeply about what they want. So it's no longer just, I want to slam in some inclusion training. So,
Right.
for example, I have a client who says, we want to design a high potential program with a path for those who identify as non-male and a path for people of color. And it might be, a person meets both of those. And so, that's a much more complex and strategic, thoughtful request than probably what we had 5, 10 years ago, right? Related to an inclusion training. And that's something I personally I enjoy that very much because there's not a black and white answer, right? There's no right answer. And there's a lot of different avenues you can go, but this is something where none of us have the magic card with the answer written on it. We have to figure this out together, right? And we have to figure out what is right for this particular client or this particular person. But I think that people are really sitting back and listening, and they're saying, I'm not the expert on this, but let's figure this out together. It's a very different landscape, very different.
I know it's so important. Someone was saying to me the other day, if we don't get this right, we'll miss out on, from a talent acquisition perspective, leaders will miss out on recruiting and having access to the most diverse talent pool that's
Yes,
ever existed. I
absolutely.
remember joking about it 15 years ago, when my kids and nephew and nieces were all younger, saying we couldn't possibly imagine what jobs they would have.
Mhm.
And we used to say it as a bit of a joke. And I'm sure my parents before me said it as well. And as each generation has moved on, it gets more and more difficult to imagine what roles. If you go back to 2005, before the iPhone was launched, who'd have thought that, designing apps as a 16-year-old would make you a multimillionaire and become a philanthropist for the rest of your days? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, playing video games. Who knew that that would lead to something, right? And I mean, we grew up without the internet. So my kids can't imagine that, right? So
No,
it's
it's
so
true.
different. And I think you're bringing up a great point in that one of the things some of the younger generations have shown us is that they're able to create things on their own that we haven't imagined before, right? So if you're a leader in a company and not really figuring out what to do to attract this diverse talent, they will go and create their own path.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And listen, not everybody's a Spotify or a Facebook or a Twitter, but
Right.
actually the talent pool is incredible. It does require, and so I'm interested here because I think it requires a real shift in mindset. I look at some of the challenges that, from a political perspective, your country has had in recent years. And without going in that rabbit hole that is your, number 45, um, I do think that there's something in the data and reports I was reading that, you were saying before offline, how many people actually do still support that style of leader.
Mhm.
And I wonder how many of those people form part of an environment that is maybe a bit frightened of inclusivity and all the changes that are coming. And actually, it's a certain demographic that does support that environment. And it seems as though the world is splitting, those that really want that inclusivity and those that are fighting and resisting what I believe is a natural order that we're becoming more inclusive. I don't know. Is that I interpret this through CNN, by the way. So that is my only frame of reference for that last statement. Um, it's not, a whole variety of different news outlets. But I just wonder: are we seeing the same challenges in political life and daily life as we are maybe in offices? Maybe that's the question I'm trying to pose.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting conversation to have, honestly, because I think that there's people out there who have said in some of the companies that I'm working with, like, you know, these are not topics that I grew up talking about at home, and I don't expect to talk about it at work, and it really is frightening. I don't know when I'm going to say the wrong or the right thing. And I don't know that if I say something that doesn't affect party A, it will affect party B.
Even
Or some
more.
people have their own interpretations, their own lenses. And so I really do think, though, it's about us meeting people where they're at, which is one of the reasons that I don't like kind of the peanut butter approach to inclusion conversations. I think it you have to really study and listen, see where people and organizations and cultures are at, and right size the conversation for what people are ready for, right? So someone who says, I've never experienced any diversity and I'm afraid of it, don't laugh here, but I'm going to say, like, a potluck lunch and just talking about different foods is probably a really a good conversation to have to introduce, versus somebody who's kind of much more adaptive in style and has traveled or understands that, even between people who visually look the same, there are great differences, and knows how to kind of flex to those styles. And the kind of support that that person needs is probably more like, how do they sort of reinvest in themselves and re-energize, because that takes a lot of energy, all that flexing. And that if you sent those two people to the same training, one person is not going to connect and the other one is going to be bored. So
Yeah, they'll experience it differently. And
yes.
in fact, even, you put two people from the same family in the same experience, and they've experienced it different, and they're even more connected, right, through just experience and context. Um, I've always felt on this inclusion piece, so help educate me here. I don't see leadership programs that are just designed for men.
Mhm.
I wonder why there are. How do we balance that with leadership programs for people of a specific color or a gender identification? How does that work without it being a form of positive discrimination against maybe those men that are feeling nervous about all the changes and they don't understand why toilets should be unisex, or whatever it might be? Help them understand it.
Yeah. I am starting to see that come about more. I just think things were so uneven that companies are saying, well, I have so much work to do here. Let me get it here. But I think we're heading in that direction, because I think what we're really saying is first of all, I want the collective group experience. But secondly, each subgroup has their own experience, and I want to explore that further, you know? And so I think we will see it. But there is, I think, a body that would say, well, everything right now was designed with the dominant group in mind. So first, in the spirit of prioritization and hitting the areas that we were not the best at, let's go there. But I think we're going to see it, and I feel like there's a case for it.
I think in some arenas it's more obvious than others.
Mhm.
It's definitely it's beeping on leaders' radar. It seems that well-being and inclusivity seem to be beeping on people's radar today. Growing out of the lockdowns around the world, they seem to be the two themes that have moved out of the world of HR and moved onto the agenda of the leadership team.
Yes.
I feel from my conversations with clients that I'm having those conversations less with HR people now and more with leaders who are concerned about well-being. What does it look like, feel like? How do we improve it? How do we connect with it? How do I get my guys to, go for a walk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and not feel they need to make the time up at 6? You know?
Right. Yeah. And I think you're bringing up a really good point that, to me, the best people strategies, which is another area of passion for me, are woven into a company's strategy. They're like, an HR strategy is not something separate. It's how are the people going to focus, and what are they going to do to bring our company's strategy to life? That's the people strategy. And so I love seeing happen exactly what you just described. Things like well-being, being inclusive. These conversations are how I'm going to achieve my company strategy. Because if they're not part of it, people are going to burn out. And as you said, the up and coming workforce is not going to want to work here. So you'll have a strategy that we will just keep in a boardroom, you know?
Yeah, and actually right now, most businesses are not strategizing beyond a quarter or two.
Yes.
They're not long-term. So we actually have capacity to put on the agenda discussions, because I think, when people start returning to offices and it becomes an option, people are going to have a choice to make. Not least of all because of the institutionalizing feeling that the last year has probably cemented in many of us, that almost we've forgotten what it's like to go into the office.
Oh, right.
And people say, oh, I can't wait to go back and see everybody. And then you hear during the lockdown periods where we came out of it and offices opened and offices said, hey, come back to work. People were like, well, maybe not just yet.
Right. Right.
So it's like, I do want to come back, but probably not until I've been vaccinated.
Yes. Yeah. But on my own terms. We humans are like that, aren't we?
But it's an interesting observation, isn't it? Because there's people talking about what we crave, what we miss. What is it that people are craving and missing? They're missing that connection. So families coming together. I get that. But also families are a major point of ruction and disharmony in a lot of people's lives. People who like going out for dinner and restaurants and pubs, they're missing clearly. But there are an awful lot of people, probably more, who don't have the money to do that, never did before the pandemic, don't now. I sometimes wonder, who we're really catering for when we talk about, all these people's challenges with the lockdown. Could leaders, do you think, role model more exemplary behaviors during this time? Could we help people in how they act and operate as we move out of hopefully lockdown and into the brave new world that is going to be post-pandemic, post-COVID.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something really important and very interesting to really consider, which is what will the transition look like and what will the new world look like versus just rushing back and trying to make it look and seem exactly like it did before, because my eyes are open to different things. And so if a leader, and there are these companies and there are these leaders, if a leader's saying we got to get back in the office and get back to, exactly how we were, you're kind of telling the workforce, I don't understand this metamorphosis we've all been through, and I can't change. I want to go back to how I was comfortable before. And I think the most powerful thing we can say as leaders today is it is going to be different. Let's figure that out together. We know we have business results to achieve. I think most people, you probably not keeping them in your companies if they don't understand that, right? We've got to deliver a result. How can we deliver a result after all the things we've been through? Right. And being open to that conversation. And again, sometimes for leaders, it's very difficult to enter into conversations where I don't have the answer. Right. But it's really being comfortable with that ambiguity. We don't have the answer. We've never done this before.
Does go completely against the human condition of wanting things to be concrete.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But it is a challenge, and I wonder, as leaders, we need to be able to role model the discomfort in those conversations.
Yes.
People talk about the new normal, Swati, all the time, and I find myself almost sounding a little irritated when I go, it's not about a new normal. This is normal.
Yes.
So who knows what? I don't think it should go back to how it was.
Right. Absolutely. And we might have another pandemic, like, right? We're so interconnected. It has proven our interconnectedness, right? And so, I mean, look what we've proven. Look at how much we can get done with all of us being locked down at home without all of our normal stuff and interactions. And so, I mean, talk about a new model of thinking and talk about being forced into it, right?
Well, I was listening to a radio show the other day. I would say they sit more central than right or left, but probably right of the center from a political perspective. And they were talking about if you changed out the industries that measured growth in countries, and you took maybe healthcare and tech and the world of security, you might find actually that the markets had grown over the last year. Then if you look at some of the markets which clearly have been hit, and industries that have been hit appallingly by the pandemic. And I have close family in events, in weddings, in the world of music and arts, and they've been decimated by what's happened. I mean, literally for a year, they've been, if they weren't teaching as an option, or perhaps well named enough to do live concerts and stream them, it's been a tough as boots year for a lot of people, and that's not going to change overnight. So with all this talk of the new normal, it's like forget the new normal. This is normal now.
Yeah, it's a new leadership moment.
Yeah.
So pull out that blank sheet of paper. It's a new leadership moment. And really stepping into that with openness, flexibility, adaptability, a willingness to pivot, I think is very important. I had this interesting conversation the other day with one of my friends about, the Instacart app, the apps that deliver groceries to you.
Mhm.
So I would have gone into a grocery store and sort of re-engineered the process of how miserable it is to stand in line. I look at it and I say, how can we make this better for everybody, right? And perhaps come up with that self-checkout. But somebody else looked at it and said, why don't I just get rid of the whole thing? Why don't I
Yeah.
just get the whole thing? And I just think that's really interesting. And that's the kind of thinking that we need now.
But we also need the education to come with it, because I remember a couple of years ago sitting in my doctor's surgery for a checkup appointment. And there was an old lady sitting in the same row as me. And she was there when I came in, and she was there when I came out of my appointment. And I was kept waiting, as all doctor's surgeries do, at least 15-20 minutes before, I was called. I came out and she was still sat there. And as I'm walking out the door and I kind of turn around and I realized, it kind of dawned on me, when I came in, I had to go to this iPad on the wall and I
Oh,
put my national security number into the iPad, which then recognizes me, sends a message to the system that I've arrived for my appointment. She'd been sat there for over an hour because no one told her that they'd done away with the reception.
oh.
Someone looked at that and said, we don't actually need somebody to sit at reception and take all the abuse. You come in, you sign in, and you get called when ready. We don't actually need that. This poor old lady. So I actually went back and I said to reception, I don't know if you're aware, this old lady's been sat here for quite a while. And someone went and dealt with her and took her over and did her national insurance number.
Oh.
But so people look at things and they think, wow, we could do it this way. But we are still multi-generational at work.
Yes.
So yes, if I'm sitting in that sort of, either sort of, that younger generation or generations, the 2 or 3 that are still, driving creativity, I think that there's a responsibility that more tenured leaders, they need to really become open-minded about how this is all going to play out.
Yes. Open-minded and listen, right?
What have you really been grateful for over the pandemic? Like, what's been highlights where you thought, you know what, I didn't expect that this year. That was really cool.
Yeah. So one that's probably more obvious is, my husband and I are both working at home, and we've been able to have really thoughtful, continuing conversations about what we want in our retirement years and what we want that to look like. We also get to hear each other on our calls, and so it's really kind of nice to understand better what each of us do. So that's been really wonderful. Some of the unexpected things that I'm grateful for, my mother, had some real issues with her health. And Friday was her 85th birthday. And I was sitting across from her through a shield with masks on. And she was opening her present on the other side of the shield. And I thought, even as crazy as it is, the human spirit, like we're together in the way that we can be right now.
Yeah.
And I was just so thankful for that moment. I can't even tell you, because probably when you and I first connected, I just didn't know if I was going to get that moment.
No, you certainly did.
I didn't know.
Happy birthday, Mum. I think
Thank you. Thank
that
you.
is fabulous.
Yeah.
Any which way you can, quite frankly, right now, you take those moments. Look, we're coming full circle. We started with some of your observations. You've talked us through the kind of things that we could be looking at. My last question to you then is a bit more from a strategic point of view. What are the strategic challenges you think leaders have right now? We've talked about the people challenges. From your own perspective, when you look out strategy-wise, what are the challenges leaders are also having to deal with?
Well, I think certainly the way we work will be a challenge, right? And now that I've collected all these diverse voices, how do I take action based on all these diverse opinions, right? But I think also, how will you communicate that change to your end customers, right? So the leader has to bring their internal folks along, but you want that to show up differently to your external customers too, because now people are even more aware of, what is your impact on the earth? How are you treating your people? And everyone has such a microphone in front of them for voicing their thoughts. And so bringing all of this together is going to be a task. And I think it's not a task that's let's just work 23 hours out of 24 hours. We have to think differently. And you really need a rested, fresh mind for that. So I would say, like, resist that urge to say, like, let's just stay on Zoom for 15 hours until we figure it out. That's not going to be the way to figure it out.
Yeah, I like that actually. You stumbled, I think, on the title for this, because what you've highlighted for me is we need to think differently, we need to act differently, and we need to respond differently. And it's
Yeah.
not about the new normal, it's actually about doing these things differently.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, Swati, that's been excellent. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming
Brett.
on. That's just been an exceptional chat. When we get this program finally started, will you come back and talk coaching with me?
Absolutely. I would love that. Thank you.
Swati, have a lovely evening. Well, rest of the day for you. I've got an evening, well, just around the corner by the look of the sun. Thank you very much for spending time.
Thank you, Brad. Bye-bye.